we'll get started here. I'm going to get Ryan Banta to start us off. The whole point of this is that Ryan's constantly pestering me to talk about things that he wants to talk about. So, no, Ryan wrote an article for Simply Faster on am I a good sprint coach? And he listed off a lot of different sort of, I guess, measurables and issues around that. So we were kind of talking about it, just back and forth, chatting back and forth. And I thought, okay, this is not a bad sort of topic to get into broader with coaching and maybe anything for that matter. Like, I think my first joke back to him was like, well, it's kind of like me asking like, well, am I a good husband or am I a good father? Right. And I don't know what measurables there are there, but I could get my wife on the line too. So, but, maybe I don't want to do that. But certainly, I think we all think about that. Like, you always see the guys who get the accolades who are associated with the pro team who wins championships, or the guys who have the all-star athlete, and like, oh, he must know what he's doing because he's associated with this guy who's won this many Super Bowls. But are there objective versus subjective criteria that we have to look at, to go over and maybe self-evaluate or evaluate each other? So I'll let Ryan start off, but I'd like to hear from everybody today and kind of get their take on how they assess themselves and whether or not that's, is that a fair assessment? Is that biased? Are you too hard on yourself? I think I'm pretty hard on myself. I'm like, I still suck. But we'll get Ryan to start us off on his thoughts, and maybe you can touch on some points from the article if people haven't had a chance to read it. Ryan. Okay.
Yeah. So I wrote an article for Simply Faster actually in July, and it finally made its way onto the net in October. And that probably has more to do with my bad grammar and my learning disabilities that they had to clean up what I was trying to say. But they did a really good job, in my opinion. And it was this question of, there's been a lot of discussion since we haven't been able to compete, most of us, in the world of track and field, which is one of the most measurable sports. How do you do a good job? And is that something that's concrete? Is it more a philosophical choice? Or are there things that you can do to kind of narrow it down to figure out what you're doing? And I mean, in the world of sport of track and field and cross country and swimming, those are sports that are very, very measurable. And I believe there are ways that you can kind of show your work, in terms of improvement of the average, raising the floor of all of your athletes, and using a lot of different testing data, at the beginning, middle, and end, and then your performances at the beginning, middle, and end, and accruing data over a long, long period of time to show your progress, to know where, okay, if this kid runs this time in my program, it probably means this. Now, that data may not be valuable to someone else using my data, but the scheme in which I acquired the data might be valuable for them to figure out, like, yeah, they actually are really doing a good job. And I know that there's been, a lot of conversation on training methods and a lot of debate on coaches who are getting to the point where they're retiring and moving on. Like, was Clyde Hart really a good coach, or did he have a lot of great talent? And I would say, yes. He did both. He had both things. He had a lot of talent, but he produced a lot of results at an elite level. And there are people who oftentimes are naysayers of that. There's a particular coach that very much uses that particular coach as a contrast to his system, trying to show that maybe he wasn't as successful as he could have been, or he was just successful because of his talent. And we all know when we have athletes, we get the most attention probably from our biggest successes and our worst failures. But the reality is, where we do our best work is with the people who are in the middle of those two things. They're making progress, they're improving, they're getting better. And sometimes our biggest success stories are the kids or athletes that will never, ever really make a big spotlight or explosion on a national scene or even in a local scene. They're the kid that, I had a young lady that started out, and she tested out in a 1600. She ran 1040. That's so slow. She didn't walk. She wasn't obese. She wasn't injured. She was just that slow. But over the course of 5 years, I got her all the way down to a 537. Essentially, I cut that human in half. Her weight didn't change. She got more fit, she got a little bit stronger. Her body composition changed slightly, but it was progress. And then you say, well, that's just one kid. Maybe that kid was special. Okay, well, then you've got to show those results over time to prove that you're doing a good job to yourself, but also you need to have some tough losses to make some decisions on where you go next. How do you improve? How do you cycle yourself up? Who's your next mentor? What's the next connective tissue that you're driving towards to try to create another opportunity for yourself where it keeps getting missed? And then the other thing where I feel like if you're a good coach, you also have to, and I didn't talk about this in the article, but you have to own your mistakes. The weekend before my article was released, my cross-country girls had the single worst performance I've ever had as a coach. They all ran terrible. And instead of getting mad and, why did this happen? I literally went back through my training logs and my workouts, and I go right there, Thursday's what happened. We haven't done anything like that, even though it wasn't hard. Somebody, in the younger age might just be like, oh, the sky is crashing. What did I do? These kids must have been out partying, something. They would put the onus of the bad performance on them as opposed to the coach. And I immediately, whether I knew right away that it was my fault or not, I made that connection. When we got on the bus, I apologized to the girls because they were not ready to race and they raced so poorly. But I promised them also that I'm going to fix that and that they won't have tired legs like that again. And I will make sure that we create a couple more days of space if I would do a workout like that to give them a chance to get their legs back. And these are the kind of things when you're thinking about, are you a good coach? Are you a bad coach? Even in your bad years, you could be doing your very, very best coaching. And I think that that's one of the things that a lot of people have to understand. I remember when I had Emily Sisson, who some of you guys probably know was a world championship finalist in the 10,000, and Diane Robinson, everybody thought I was the greatest coach in the world. I'm a much better coach now after them than I was with them, because I've been forced since then to figure out how do I get close to times that freaks can produce. How do I close that gap between an average kid and make them above average or make them a star? And so that's kind of the point of the article, is getting down and drilling down to what is really a good system? How do we know that system is working? How do we know we're doing the right thing by our athletes? And how do we know that we're improving? To answer that real big question of, am I a good coach?
Was it a tough article to write?
Yeah, and when I was asked to write it, I was asked to write it in a slightly different way, trying to use other famous coaches to explain their systems and why they were good. And I didn't think that that was fair because I'm not them. And I didn't want to make assumptions on why they were outright successful. I mean, I did mention somebody on this call, Mike Hurst and Dan Path, and some of these coaches who have produced results at a bunch of different levels with a bunch of different kids that are pretty obvious. And I think that when I was originally asked to write it, it was more of like, well, let's attack a certain philosophy that's out there that may not be the best for track and field athletes or athletes in general that's really popular. And I said, instead of attacking, which is such a commonplace in our world of politics and media and everything else, and slamming people, but providing no ideas, I wanted to provide, well, this is my process on how I know when I'm doing a good job or if I'm doing a good job, and how I try to narrow down the window of mistakes. And to do that, as you guys can tell when I'm talking here, it takes me a while to land my airplane, but I wanted to be thorough. I wanted to make sure that I covered everything so that, because it was kind of, could be seen as braggadocious, and that wasn't the intent. It was the intent to say, this is why I feel comfortable where I'm at, but yet I'm not satisfied. I want to continue to get better and want to continue to figure these things out. But here are the methods in which I use to do it, to conclude that I think I'm doing a pretty good job. But every year that goes by, I know that I know less than I thought I did. Every time I talk to on these zoomPOPs and I listen to the Rob Father, or I listen to you, or I listen to Dan or Mike, and I'm going, man, there's so much more out there to know. And that can be really scary as the world gets more and more revealed to you. But at the same time, I also feel comfortable that that's okay. And that as long as I'm in the process of ever growing and the ever improvement that I'm trying to be on that path of permanent, perpetual growth, that I feel comfortable. So it was hard to write, for sure.
Well, that's certainly a part of your personality and your makeup, because I remember I was listening to a debate between you and another coach, And I think he was kind of criticizing you for saying like, oh, you're working too hard. You're spending too much time individualizing. Like, you don't need to do that. And you were, basically defending it, saying what you're saying now is that you want to make sure every base is covered.
Right. Well, and I think that that's one of the most important points, is that anytime I hear an absolutist talk that this is absolutely the way it is, or this is absolutely the way it isn't, drives me bonkers. And when I was a young, naive coach, and I would, talk to Dan Path, or I talked to Rick McGuire, a sports psychology guy, and I'm like, please, God, give me the answers, give me the golden rules and the bullets that I need to use, and I'm going to be fine. And the reality is over time, I realized when they say it all depends, that's because they're trying to be thorough to the process of the unique situation that every athlete presents. And if you just shoot kids down a funnel, whether it's a short, intense funnel or whether it's a big, long one, you're doing the exact same thing. You're denying the reality of the human condition, which is all of us have very different makeups, and that we need to apply a lot of different tools and skills in order to be the best coach we can be. And the way I look at it is, you can get out a big sledgehammer and you can do a lot with the sledgehammer. But if you ever go to a great mechanic, they have a ton of tools. And maybe because they're so great, they only use 5 or 6 tools, but they know how to use all of them in the garage. And once in a while, when a very unique situation presents itself, they will use that tool if necessary. And that's where I think that when I was criticized for being complex or too sophisticated, I was like, that's a compliment. That's the biggest compliment everybody could give me, is that if you're saying I'm playing 12D chess and I'm getting results, I feel pretty good about what I'm doing. I feel like if, young men and women are coming to us to be the best that they can be physically, that is a very important position for us to be in. And we need to do everything we can to be a master of a lot of systems, and then apply whatever system we feel best works for that athlete based on experience, based on our data, based on the kids' results, their progression or regression.
Yeah, it's like we're doing renovations, and so I've been doing all the tear down, all the labor, right? And then we have a guy come over, he's a friend of ours, a contractor, and then he'll like put the drywall up like, and I'm just like, it's because he has that drill and that bit that holds the screw. And no, he's just better than me. So sometimes you got to be careful with the tools analogy too, because sometimes people are just better than you and they have the tools too. So it's very
100%. And it takes it, a person can destroy a house in a couple of days, but it takes months to build one. And I think that's a concept too when we think about how we're trying to build a program. It takes a long time to build our system and our development and our process. But man, if you make some grandiose, grotesque mistakes, you can destroy it. And that's the same thing with people. People can easily tear things down and be critical, right? And critical of what you do and try to destroy you. But the reality is to actually build something that's robust and sustainable and can take on problems, requires a whole lot of skill and the right tools and everything else.
Yeah. We're gonna stay along this line of sort of the individual measurable sport, and then I want to branch out, get people talking like Ken Vick and about other sports too, because I know there's a lot of intangibles there, and I was even listening to a talk about like, who's going to be the next NFL coach? Will it be Dabo Sweeney from Clemson? And people are like, well, he's not really an X's and O's guy, he's more of a recruiting rah guy. And so we'll get into that sort of thing too, as well as what sort of coaching skills you have. Mike Hurst, you heard what Ryan had to say. How do you kind of evaluate what you do? And I know you've had world-class competitors and you have, more national competitors, and do you kind of treat everybody the same and you kind of self-evaluate based on everybody's improvement rather than like, this person went to the Olympics and this person got a medal? How do you kind of self-assess yourself, being that you've been doing this longer than any of us?
It's an interesting question, and it's one that I probably should have given a lot more thought to. But I look at the weakest performer in my squad, and I wonder why. Why did I fail to deliver more for you, so you could get up to the level or approach the level of the other people who are maybe borderline national team members or what have you? And it's kind of like, in terms of judging yourself, your own performance, and why you continue to push forward. I think it gets around to just curiosity. Do you have a growth mindset? That cliche. Do you want to continue learning? Is it fun? Is it exciting to break into new territory and new ideas, and to continually reassess your own performances based on where the kids started with you, you know? So you look back and you say, well, you weren't even in the sport 4 years ago. Now you've scraped onto the 4x4 national team for the World Championships. That's probably a pretty good result. Others could have done better, probably, but I'm not others, and they chose to train with me. More fool them. You know, you just always do the best you can, and if it's not good enough, you just say, man, I can't. I've given you the best I have. And I always consult with other people. Dan Paff is my main go-to man, but I go to Derek Hansen and I chat. I even chat with Ryan Banta sometimes.
Say it isn't so. Say it isn't so.
Because he knows every coach in history, and he knows what made them tick through that phenomenal work that he put together, the Sprinters Compendium, free plug. And it's really weird that the sport that in track and field, it's such an objective sport. You either win or you didn't win. You either broke the record or you didn't. You qualified for the national team or the Olympic Games or you didn't. And yet, as a coach, how do you assess yourself? It's such a subjective opinion. The assessment of others may have more to do with your personality traits than even how you deliver the message or the actual outcomes. So I think that's fraught with the potential for mistakes, and you should never be too negative about yourself. At least you're in there having a go. So I think that's the most important thing, and that you're always open to ideas and you don't have a closed mind thinking, I heard this from Dan Paff, therefore it's the 10 Commandments and coming from the mountain on high. You've got to, sometimes you just got to be your own man or woman and go out and test your ideas and bounce your ideas around people who are trusted mentors, and just see if there's any kind of chance that you might be right. And that's how I wrote my my program design for a quarter milers back in the mid 80s. It could have been a disaster. It was an experiment, but it produced 2 national records and a couple of Olympic finalists. And I thought, so it works. The concurrent theory of program design, which I always thought was brand new and original. But PJ Vazell, who's a dear friend, he said, oh, no, I found something like that from the Germans in the 1930s. Okay. Well, I wasn't around then, so I didn't plagiarize. I don't know what else I can say, really.
Has there ever been anybody, Mike, that you've worked with and you said, I can't do any more for you, I think you should go work with this coach, or, that type of scenario? Or have you always tried to, keep working for that athlete?
I have passed a lot of athletes on over time because I think that, I started out as a long jump coach and as a long jumper. And then I realized I'd worked with 2 of the Munich Olympic national team coaches who were based in Sydney. And I went to one of them to train with him when I was just out of school. And I ended up doing repeat 400s with the national 800 metres champion. I or Graham Ruthven. And I realised that after about a week that guy was not giving me the work that I wanted or needed to do, and I left. And then I went to the other guy, and I said, when I take off the board, do I plant ball of the foot first, heel of the foot first, or with a flat foot? And he just went, he didn't know. And I don't blame him for that, but because it was 1973 or 4 or something. And sports science was in its infancy. But they're the Olympic guys, you know? So I just thought, I'm out here on my own. I'm shooting in the dark. So I don't even know why I mentioned all of that, but it was just kind of like, guys, you got to think for yourself. You got to do your own research. You got to find mentors. And I'm 69 years old, and I still have 2 or 3 mentors who I deeply love and respect. And, you know, Kelvin Giles, Dan Paff. I was a real, I loved Charlie Francis, the late Charlie. And, you know, PJ Frizzell refers to me as his mentor, but I tell you what, it's all coming back from, it's in the opposite direction these days. He's giving me information which is priceless, and it's just a new generation of coaches. It goes around. What goes around comes around.
I want to get Keenan Robinson on and to talk about, you know, what the previous 2 fellows have talked about in track and field, and what he sees in swimming, as obviously he's been around some great coaches. And you know, obviously there you can evaluate swimming similar to track. You can look at the performances, you can look at the medals, you can look at the times, maybe even the technology. And what is different, if anything, Keenan, when you're looking at coaches and going, okay, does this person know what they're doing? And you have to work with the coaches too, and you're kind of evaluating them all the time, I assume, and going, okay, if I'm helping and providing service to this coach, you know, is this coach doing the right stuff, or do I have to help in some other areas?
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of stuff would echo what Ryan and Mike said. I think all of us would kind of, at some level, I hope, echo those 2 things. And so, I mean, when it comes to how good I am as a coach and yeah, evaluating other coaches, I think you got to have some sort of rubric. I'm a big objective guy. You know, Dan Paff is going to get mentioned again here by myself. Is, you know, he always talks about KPIs, and I actually remember 2 different conferences. So the one Tim Pillow puts on every other year for the USOPC, he had Dan speak at the first one, and then Jay DeMayo at CBASP, he had Dan Paff come out and present one. Both those times I squared away at least an hour each time, talking with Dan about KPIs and creating a good rubric. You know, he has his own individuals, completely transparent on his document and sharing it. And so I think, you know, that's how I kind of go into it. And then the other thing is I don't want it to be a one-way street where I try to assume that I know what a good coach is, and therefore I should be evaluating everybody. I think one of the biggest epiphanies I had, you know, personally, is when the first time I ever went down and visited, I saw him on here. Did he drop off? Did big game Bobby drop off? No, there he is.
He's still there. Yeah. He just put on his makeup.
But when he was at NC State, I went down and visited his one of his assistants. We had never met. We'd never even communicated via email, other than, hey, I'm coming down and seeing the swim team. Could I get some time? Because I've heard you're doing a good thing in the weight room with them. And he became my #1 auditor. And now I got to travel up to Seattle, I guess, to get my program audited. But I mean, I think that's where you need to get, I think, eventually to a coach, is meeting a complete stranger and just sharing your programs, because it's not about sitting up there and saying, like, you do the hit or you follow the tier system, or, you know, we still got some of these old crusty dinosaurs that just sit on Twitter and do that, where they're like, if you're not buying my commercialized product, you don't get it. And I don't know what it is. So be a little bit more specific. And then I think we have to be careful, but we have to include, you know, the athlete's evaluation, because at some point in time, they're going to have the opportunity to choose whoever they want to do, or just do their own stuff on their own. And you mentioned it, like, have you ever had an athlete kind of step away and go on? And I think that would be like a second really good learning experience for me in my career is it's beneficial for them to go on. Like, so whether when I was training kids at the club, so at the high school level, and they'd go on to college, that's how I became close colleagues with Jay DeMayo, because they pick up a phone and they say, hey, like, what were you doing? Like, I just had a freshman swimmer come in and actually know what the terminology, the vernacular is, how to work through a card. That's how you become, like, you expand your professional network. And I think the athletes know, right? I mean, athletes, game recognizes game, right? So, and you don't want to be this friendly waiter where they come back to you because you're always wiping their ass. Like, they come back to you because whatever, like they ask you a question and you give them a real answer. They present you with a topic like, hey, I want to break a world record. And you present them with a plan that you stand by and you firmly grasp. And I think that would go with the coaches too, right? Like, we see it, I think, oftentimes in the revenue sports where, you know, it's good. Coaches get married to their strength coaches, and that's good. They got to have the trust because it can help them break NC2A rules, because they can spend more time with them and be in a direct audit to the head coach. I mean, that is what it is. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. I would do it if I was in the revenue sport. It's just like swimming's year round, so we just do it normally. It's like doesn't resonate. But also at the time, like, if you're going, you know, if you're 500, or, you know, you're having these soft tissue injuries or whatever it's going to be, concussion, like whatever it is, like, who's going to be the man or the woman in the room to be like, hey, like, has your program changed, or are we still doing mat drills? And if we are, why are we doing that? Like, I just heard this guy, Derek Hansen, talking about, like, you might as well, like, stand on your head in the corner and rub a stick of butter in your tummy instead of doing mat drills. Like, are we like, why are we doing these things? You know, and again, like, you have to separate the, like, when we're sitting in the weight room, or we're sitting in the coach's boardroom, whatever you want to call it, it is not an attack on who you are as a human being, because when we walk out, we have fellowship, right? Like, we break bread together, whatever it may be. But, like, when we're in there, like, we're trying to get better. We're absolutely trying to be a high performance team or a high performance program. Otherwise, you're just a program. Like, don't call yourself high or elite or any of those terms, those adjectives, if you've never been to the dance, right? And repeatability. So those would be like the three things. I think finding mentors, again, that's and mentors in things that you are either really strong at and you want to make sure you're still really strong at, or things that you do need to get better at. And have your kind of, Joe Ken talks about it all the time. He's got his guys, right? His guys, right? He's got his data guy. He's got his, you know, I think he calls Brandon Marcello his sport performance guy. Like, so he relies on people where his strengths don't resonate. And these guys, you know, they resonate with him. And I think you better have that. And that's, you know, that's the value of podcasts. That's the value of things like this, where, you know, if I want to get better at the sport of swimming, obviously I'll always go back and ask Bob Bowman. I mean, he is my ultimate mentor. Like, I was with him for 15 years, but you know, if there's certain things that I know he just doesn't do a lot of in his program, it'd be stupid for me just to go back to him because I'm comfortable with that. But to have a peripheral awareness and see what he's doing, like I you know, we wouldn't always go to, like, we wouldn't have always gone to Charlie Francis to figure out how to throw the javelin, would we have? I mean, maybe we would have, but I doubt it. I think, like, we had to do those things. And then when it comes to the, you know, the strength and conditioning or the performance community, you just got to find out, like, have a non-biased opinion of what you read, what you hear, and you say that person resonates with me. I'd like to get better at XYZ, or at least get educated, right? Like, I think if you're going to try and do velocity-based training, you're probably going to call up a Brian Mahan, right? And then you might say, like, the way he explained it didn't gel with me. Let me see who else is on this game and go from there. So that's kind of how I would go through my auditing system, Derek.
Yeah. So the math has to add up for you, right? It's not like you're going to go to the guy who got the world record and just take it at face value. You can't just go to Big Time Bob and go there because of his name. You're making sure his math adds up.
Oh, you're always going to go to Big Town Bobby. That's a bad example. But yeah, to your point, right? Like, I just read an article, the Philadelphia Eagles, right? I think they're on their fourth whatever staff we want to call it, non-coaching football staff. And didn't they win the Super Bowl 3 years ago, right? So like, are the Cats that were doing it when they're like, what happened to those guys? Like, so yeah, if you just try and ride the bandwagons, then you're just gonna be going around in a circle. But bad analogy by going to Big Game Bobby. That's where you go.
So we're gonna pivot to Big Time Bob, and then we're gonna hit Kick Ass Ken, because we're going with the nicknames here. It seems to work. Bob, so we've talked about individual sports, and you can touch on that a bit as well. But when you get to your evaluation of other coaches, yourself, and you're working with like a strength and conditioning coach, what are the things you're looking for? Is like, is it the lifts? Is it wins? Is it all of the above? Is it a lot of things that Keenan touched on as well? Like, what are injuries? What are some of the key things that you're looking at when you're evaluating yourself and others in your field?
Well, I think you have to have a little bit of all that in there, and try to figure out where is that contribution coming from. I think I just answered a thread to I don't know, Kier put that out there when I'm flat, said something like, what if you were to base your success on, that which one would you be willing to be fired for? Like, like which is the thing is, do you think you can manifest best? And I mean, there was a couple of answers on there. One was, wins and losses, and the other is skill. And I say, it's none of those at all. It's what we can actually affect. Right. But at the same time, as I look over in my situation, I'm looking over sports science, sports medicine, strength and conditioning, nutrition, and sports psychology. I've got to make sure that those people are doing their thing and having a piece of everything else. They have to have an understanding. I'm going to be talking, speaking at the ASCA conference online, of course, but the thing I'm talking about is the high performance model and kind of what you need to do. One of the things in there is you have to standardize. The first thing I found that I needed to do was have a lot of commonality that exists, but nobody really uses it, right? So for instance, I think on the slide I had something like, which lunge would you like me to do? In reference to, if you say, hey, we're doing lunges, and I happen to leave the room and I say, hey, you need to watch this, go ahead and coach that. Which lunge are they going to do? Is it a forward lunge? Is it a reverse lunge? Is that what we call it? I mean, so you got to standardize the language, right? You got to standardize the protocols. You got all those things so that you can start now making comparisons amongst your strength staff, or, whatever is appropriate for your sports medicine staff. One was, I ran into somebody had a sprained ankle or whatever it is, no lower body training. Well, that's absurd. What does that mean exactly? Oh, no, they can do on their other leg. Okay, well, you need to write that down. So standardizing that all the way to, what do you expect in your freshman class to look like? What do you expect the progress in vertical jumps or 10-meter sprints or deadlifts or whatever it is? What kind of progress do you expect them to make? You can't set a number. I want them all to bench 300. That's unrealistic. But to say I expect them to increase, 10% over the academic year, that may be credible, right? And then it goes like that. And then, you should be able to say, so for me anyway, I think the physical assessments are the things that are best for us. And of course, I think you have to be subjective with the injuries, because we know that there's many reasons for injuries, right? But there is some subjectivity there, because you can't excise out what you've done and what you haven't done and how much injury is there. I think that takes a little experience and intuition. I think the two are related, experience and intuition, but for sure, there should be a certain increase that freshman classes make per sport. And it's not overall either. Swimmers are going to be different. Distant swimmers are going to be different than sprinters. So you have that. Same thing with track and field. They got all these events in there. You can't say I want my track team to go up 10% in the squat. Well, that's unreasonable, both from a common sense standpoint and physiologically. So I think what you have to do is you got to put a stake in the ground somewhere in there to monitor it, as opposed to me just saying, hey, I don't think you're very good. I mean, that's a problem. I don't think anybody that has a system that's successful does that. There's something in there that they're putting their hands on. And of course, you know, much like Keenan said, like, I know some of the guys in Philadelphia took off on their own. I don't think they got fired and removed, but if you look at some of these places where, you know, I just talked to a couple of Major League Baseball guys. Yeah, we're going to go in another direction. And the question was asked, okay, what direction is that? And they couldn't answer it. Well, I mean, that's bullshit. You know, like, okay, well, first of all, and then the following statements were, well, whatever direction you're going in, you never relayed that vision to us, you know? Okay, so you can have that argument on and on, but in the end, it's like, we're just going to bring our own people in. Well, then just say that then. But again, it's, you know, I think if you're staying away from metrics of some sort, some palpable metric, whether you're assessing coaches or giving your sport coaches an assessment of their athletes up to that point, if you don't have some reliable metric or, you know, a full rubric to say, this is where we're at, this is your team, this is your whatever, then it's just a guess. Much like just training athletes, you know, if you're just guessing on what exercise is next and how much to go up and what phase to go into, then that's a whole guess too.
What about the injury issue, Bob? Like, I know some people have used we've had a lot of injuries, so we're going to let go of our performance staff because, you know, that's the reason. Like, you know, and it's very difficult to quantify the cause, and I'll get Ken to jump in on this as well. But how do you justify like injuries as being a performance issue?
I don't think you can, honestly. I mean, well, first of all, let's be clear that typically, historically, overwhelming majority of those that are making those assessments don't know shit about what we do or how we do it, you know? So, I mean, that's pretty simple, right? Fortunately, at our school, we have somebody that does understand that, me. So that works out good, or it works out bad, right? I mean, so you can't really bullshit me when you say, oh, no, we're doing the right thing. And when I really know what that actually looks like by virtue of some people here, you, Keenan, and, you know, who I've tapped into at times, just this whole kind of, I know what that looks like. But for the most part, when you get to the pro level, you know, you don't have anybody that kind of knows what you do. So there's really no, I mean, you don't have any alternative but to just, okay, you know, that has to be a communication thing. More than anything, those type of things are just leadership problems. And I say not leadership as in leading folks, but senior staff, front office, they just have no goddamn idea. Well, like this conversation I'm going to present to the ASCA is, you know, the oversight of those positions are, well, in some instances, just absurd, just an absurd position, because they're evaluating you. They have no idea what you do. They don't watch you. They don't come in and they have no idea. I mean, yet hey, you know, we want to make a move here because we think, and there was no basis for that. You don't have any idea. But I think at some point you have to realize that collegiately or professionally, when there is one hamstring, two hamstring, three hamstring, I think as a practitioner, somewhere in there, you've got to be able to say, okay, one happens, two, perhaps three. You could probably call three a trend on a team, you know, on almost any team. And you just have to look at it. And then that's where I would get involved, or everybody's going to start talking about it. I think that's much, much harder than people think in terms of how do we take care of that? Because I mean, there's a good percentage of, I think people in here would agree, there's a good percentage of injury that shit happens. I mean, if you're going to compete and ask your body to go at a higher level, there's going to be things that happen, you know? So you have, if you want to say it in terms of, like, let's say race car driving, if you're talking about NASCAR, you know, those things will go around a while, and then you get some little thing off. It may be able to go, but not go good enough, or take a pit stop, or you get something like the most explosive events, you know, like track and field and swimming, where they're more like dragsters, right? Like you can't race with just the smallest thing off of you. So those things, you know, you got to look at. But I really do think it's much, much harder than people think it is to determine injury. I think it's way easier to get people back from injury because you have, if you're doing it right, you got healthy metrics at the beginning of the year, and then you just go after those on the way back. But to come in and try to sleuth, wow, and I also don't think it's that big a deal at the same time, like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never heard of a head coach or a position coach in a sport being fired because of injuries when they have a huge stake in it as well.
Right.
So,
well, that's the other part too, right? The oversight of the high performance position. So that's when that happens in those instances where there is high performance folks, that's my other bitch about this, is that at least in the United States, there's not enough strength in the role, right? That shouldn't be just director of, sports performance or high performance manager. It should be assistant general manager, or like in my case, senior staff, where you are the last person, involved. The pro level, many of these people, you're just like, I told Sandy Alderson one time a couple of years ago when he was with the Mets, I said, unless you make this a front office position, like assistant general manager, then it's just going to be a suggestion, like the rest of the trainers and strength coaches in the country. It's just a suggestion. I've seen it happen before. You say so-and-so can't play tonight. I go back in, put my uniform on, I come back downstairs, and the guy's in the lineup. Like, so now that was a little bit better for me where I was with the A's. It didn't really happen all like that. Nor, it was very rare. It was a miscommunication or something. Either Billy Bean had my back and what we did in a big way, mostly because, we didn't have the money to buy people and replace them. So he put a lot of stake in us, making sure that we could keep people on the field, because our first 9, the number 10 guy was a big drop. So, but at the same time, the injury piece is, it's a little bit like this COVID thing, right? If your COVID plan isn't focused on what do you do when you have an infection, then you're going to have problems. It's not how do we keep from getting an infection. That's not the focus. It's what do you do when you get one? It's because we've seen what happened when people get it and they don't manage it. Just go.
yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for that, Bob. We'll get back to you. Ken, we can start off with more of, say, how you evaluate your staff and your coaches, and then we can touch on some of these other things, as it applies to teams and different sports as well. But as somebody who's in charge of a lot of different people, how are you evaluating them? And maybe you're laying out some expectations and goals for them that you're using to evaluate later.
Ooh, that's a lot. Okay.
Sorry.
Keep it simple. I'm going to try to keep that relatively manageable. Okay. So when I'm looking at people now these days, I'm looking in 2 different roles, right? If we're on our corporate side and we're looking at a commercial business at a velocity, that's one thing. If I'm looking at our elite teams, our people that are around the world with Olympics and professional teams, that's different. Now there's commonalities and there are also differences. So I think a lot of people have said it. Bob was talking about it. Keenan was talking about it. Do you have a rubric? If I'm going to evaluate coaches, I have to decide what I think coaching is. I have to figure it out. We have to company-wise figure out, and then we actually have to communicate it, because, if going a different direction, like Bob said, like if I didn't communicate this, then how does somebody know? So we try to have those things. We have a rubric of coaching skills, but it's a continuum. I think I would take it that way. There's commonalities, like I said, whether you're coaching at a high school, some of the best coaches I've ever seen, nobody will ever hear of, nobody will ever know. They're in a trench somewhere and they're doing amazing things. I've also, like you guys all know, you've been at the highest levels and seen some horrendous coaching. I guess I would say it's context dependent, Eric, which part of the rubric or what things we're evaluating. To make it simple, like, look, if are we looking at somebody that's trying to be a 2% coach or have a wide impact is one of the things I'd say. A colleague, some of you guys might know Rhett Larson, a guy that used to work for us and then all over the place. But we're sitting there having beers one night in China years ago, and he's looking and we're talking about the experiences that we had gone through over there. And he looks at me and he's telling me, well, Ken, I always looked at you as a 2% coach. You can take one of those top athletes, and you can still get them better. And it was funny because at one point in my career, I would have been thrilled about that feedback. I'd have been like, oh, that makes me a great coach. And at the time when he was saying it to me, you know, I think I'd done this long enough that I learned some things that wasn't what it was all about. And I also wanted to make sure I had a wider impact and I could reach a wider audience. So while he's telling me that as a counselor, I was sitting there going, oh, great, you're insulting me. You're telling me I'm not a good enough coach to work with a broad enough base. And I share that because I think that's a lot of what I think about when I'm looking at who I'm evaluating. If in all these settings, there's art and science, I guess I'm going to look at. I don't think you can separate the two. And you can't get results in the science side if you don't have some degree of art. But there's results. You know, you got to have metrics. If you're not measuring, you're guessing. So what are you going to measure? How do you define it? Do you see it? And, you know, a bunch of people said it. I mean, Ryan in his article really goes into it. It's not just, are you getting these athletes better? Are you getting them as good as they should be or as you could be and consistently? High school athletes, like he said, look, they're going to get better by natural growth and maturation to some degree. You better beat that curve. Otherwise, you're really not doing a good job. And if somehow you manage to not get them better at all, and we've had velocity locations and coaches that don't get kids better, holy crap, how'd you manage to do that? Because they should just get better by age and by spending some time doing stuff. If you actually get kids with no progress or back up, you're a freaking horrible coach. What is going on? And we've seen it. So you got to have metrics, 100%. And those metrics become more important, I guess I would argue, as I go up in level. I need consistent metrics. I need to see that you've done it and are doing it consistently in a way we define. Yeah, you asked a lot there. I guess the last thing, trying to remember what you asked, Eric, but the other one I would say when I'm evaluating coaches, like I want to walk in and the first time I see a coach, I might not know their history. I might not know all the metrics they've had. Have they done all these things the right way? But if I walk in and I can see that they don't have presence, the speed session, the weight session, whatever, it isn't organized, if their athletes aren't listening, you know, we're kind of done there. You know, that's again, on that continuum, I heard a designer years ago share with me a kind of a continuum, and he shared the restaurant analogy. I know Mike Boyle's used this a lot, but I love the restaurant analogy, right? When you come into coaching, you're like that line cook. Learn how to frickin' cook vegetables really, really well. Get awesome at it, know every in and out. Then you move to soups, and then you move to this, and eventually you move up to meat. But get good at your skills, and that's kind of like the foundation, right? When you want to move up to that sous chef, now you're into creating recipes. Now you're into problem solving in the kitchen. Now you're into managing it. Now you're a coach, right? Now you're at a different level of coaching. And when you want to create whole cultures, integrated support teams, all this other stuff, now you're an executive chef, but you got to go through that continuum. And I guess I would just say, I see evaluating coaches right now, when we go into centers or even I'm hiring international coaches, man, there's a lot of people that are skipping steps. They want to jump to being an executive chef. They want to go create instead of building it up the way they need. Did I answer any of what you asked?
That was awesome. One thing I got from that was that your metrics and your measurables have to have metrics and measurables and so on. Like you said, like if somebody's getting results, then you go to the next level. You're like, okay, they have good session management. They have good practice or planning. They have good, they may be good in sales because they're bringing people into the business too. So
there's different. Yeah. What are you looking for?
Yeah, so it's such a huge assessment that kind of builds on itself, and like you said, it'll start to prop people up and move people up the ladder as they start hitting all those metrics.
You know, too, I would just share is kind of good coaching versus mastery, and I think when I hear a lot of people talk here, it's great because I think a lot of what we're talking about is, are you on a process of mastery? And there's some coaches who won't be, and they'll be good coaches. I might even disagree with some stuff they do, but if they hit those boxes, okay, you're a good coach. You're building people, you're getting results. If you're doing those two things, you can be a good coach using methods I might think I would never use, but you're a good coach. Now, mastery is a different process. It's what everybody's talking about, right? Do you have a growth mindset? Are you looking to different people? Are you talking to different people? Are you willing to challenge yourself when it went wrong And are you, like we're doing here, are you questioning yourself? Am I good enough? Am I doing the right thing? So I think they're related, but mastery is a different process. And yeah, that's a continual one, right? We're all talking about it and going through it. So can you master your craft and apply it in a lot of different settings?
Yeah, no, I got a lot out of that, Ken. Thank you very much. I wanted to get Carly and Marina to talk a bit here because we don't get many female participants in the zoomPOP, and maybe it's my fault, but I want to capitalize on this right now. So we'll get Carly first to maybe express, how you evaluate yourself, and do you think it's different being a female coach? And it may not be, but I just don't want to assume that it is or isn't. But I want to get your perspective on it and make sure we cover all our bases here. And you might have a unique perspective that we haven't thought about.
Yeah, thanks, Tarek. That's always the big question, right? Does the woman in the room feel like the woman in the room a little bit? And I think, as some other people kind of have suggested already, it depends on the room, I think. And if there's a feeling of that this is an environment where it is kind of a growth environment as a whole. So I would say for me personally, it kind of depends, in a professional sense of like fellow coaches. And then in terms of with my athletes, I think, again, it depends on the group. I've had groups where I definitely am more challenged by some of the individuals in our group, whether that's the men or the women, depending on personalities, right? Because it's not necessarily tied to gender. But then other years, it, is something that never really comes up. Demographics, I think, play a part in it in terms of, are these young men or women used to having women that are in, roles of authority? That's something that I have dealt with a little bit coaching in smaller towns versus big cities and things like that, where family dynamics are a little bit different. So I think it kind of depends on a lot of the background information that's going on. But I think for me, trying to evaluate myself since I've kind of read this article has been really good. It's had my mind kind of churning over the last few days. And I think for me, that's kind of the answer to it a little bit, is how I think I determine whether or not I'm doing a good job, or if I'm in a good headspace within my job, or when I'm evaluating other coaches and how they're doing, is their degree of curiosity and their willingness to make changes, their willingness to try new things, their willingness to challenge themselves in what it is that they're doing, what it is that they're thinking, what it is that they are listening to. I think that's kind of been the silver lining of COVID a little bit, is, platforms like this where you're listening to people talk that you would have never gotten a chance to listen to previously. And so I think for me, I think the curiosity element is a big piece in, okay, is this person motivated to continue to try different things and be able to, really demonstrate the growth mindset? Because I think it's one thing to have it and to feel it and to say it, but I think it's another beast to be able to actually demonstrate that with, within your staff, within your department, within your team itself. I think for me, one thing that has been kind of a cool challenge that I've undertaken a little bit by accident is other sport coaches in our department starting to reach out to me. And, so this is my third year that I've been at Parkside, and having other sport coaches reach out, and they're like, hey, I got this kid, like, I need your help. Or it's, hey, as a whole, we need to get off the base faster. Okay. So for example, like last year I worked with our women's softball team and just did really basic, like movement things and hurdle mobility and plyometrics and that kind of deal. Things that typical sport coaches don't necessarily know how to implement or don't feel comfortable doing. So they, want to bring in coaches from other areas that do have that experience, whether that's track or strength conditioning or et cetera. It was a really big challenge for me because, well, one, it was really fun because a totally different group of athletes. And two, I had to figure out how to talk to a group of athletes that don't understand track, or like don't understand like speed drills, or what a proper warm-up looks like maybe, and you know, all of these different variables. And so I think for me, I know that I'm going in the right direction when things like that are exciting to me, and things like that are something that I continue to seek out and hopefully do a good job at. And I think in the midst of everything going on right now, I think Bob kind of touched on it, where it's, you know, in the season of COVID, I think maintaining my curiosity right now is sort of my definition of how I feel I'm doing overall as a coach at this particular time.
Yeah, how important is, like, when you look at others and you evaluate others too, like how important is that desire for professional development and learning? And everybody's touched on it here, is like, you know, like even Mike Hurst was saying, like, I look at the lowest athlete and try to figure out how I can make them better, which is kind of an impetus for professional development and getting better. I mean, is that something that you look at too, is like, hey, that's part of my makeup in terms of, I want to get better. Who do I have to talk to? Do I have to talk to big time Bob? Do I have to, you know, make that connection? And, you know, because it's important. I mean, that's one of the reasons we do this, is that we have access to these people, and it's great to have you on here. But is that, like you said, right now, that's a priority?
Yeah, I think the willingness to seek out professional development, I know a couple of other coaches have touched on it, in areas that aren't yours, you know. So like I mentioned kind of working with softball last year. I've been doing a little bit with basketball this year. And I think your willingness to do those things is kind of I guess maybe a KPI of longevity. And if someone's going to be in this for a long time, if they're kind of interested in, you know, coaching on a like small scale, but then also on a bigger scale. So, you know, looking beyond just your team, looking at, you know, your department or kind of what's going on. You know, I know Ryan talks about comparing data with other schools in his conference, right? So you start to look at all these different variables kind of within your, you know, outside of your own little nucleus. But I think that in terms of being able to have the sense of reaching out to other coaches, working with different programs, being able to start conversations with strangers. I think those are all kind of indicators of somebody that is wanting to do this job in the right way and really wanting to do it at a high level.
That's great. Thanks for that input, Carly. I want to switch it over to Marina. Marina, what are some of the things that you look for in terms of not just improving yourself, but self-evaluating and then even comparing yourself to other people? Like, I think that's, you know, a lot of the time I say, well, you know, with social media, we don't want to compare ourselves, but I mean, I hate to say it, but I'm comparing myself to Banta and Hurst and Alejo and Vic all the time. Like I'm awake at night going, how can I be as good as them? Like, what are some of the things you're doing?
Yeah. Well, personally, I feel like that's one of my biggest struggles, considering that I'm actually a college student. I'm a sophomore studying applied movement science at UT. So seeing like all these like professional people and coming to like conferences like this, it just like sometimes it can get to my head a lot, because it's like, wow, like all these people, like, you know, so much knowledge, and like just how did like the process to how they get there. But it's like someone mentioned right now, you know, some people like you want to skip that process, and it's like I find myself doing that too. It's like, oh, like I want to like have this like big facility, and it's like, well, like I need to like take a couple steps back and like start small. And it like kind of scares me sometimes, because it's like, well, and the whole topic of this is like, how do you know you're being a good coach? And that's what like scares me the most, is because I don't know if I'm being a good coach. I feel like the fact that I put myself in like positions of doubt is like what is like really scary about this, or like pursuing this career is like very scary for me, because I really don't know where to go. And so I just really appreciate like what everybody's been saying right now. I really appreciated where somebody was talking about how, you know, you have to get good at what you do. And sometimes I dismiss the fact that I have like certain characteristics, and there's good qualities that I have that could be in a coach. And I want to compare myself to others, like, well, they have like this facility, or they're running their program like this. And it's like, well, maybe I should be doing that. But, you know, I don't think every coach is like different, and they have their own way of doing it. And just because like I do or the way I hope to run my program doesn't mean that it won't be successful. But I guess that's just my biggest question is like, since I'm so young, I really don't know like what steps to take. So I was actually going to wait till the very end to ask as like someone who's very young.
Oh, this is good. This is good because I'm going to put some guys, I'm going to put some of the veterans here on the spot to kind of answer your question as well. So
that's because one of the biggest reasons I wanted to do this is because I've had like multiple bad experiences with coaches where it's always like, you know, it's the kids, it's the athletic trainer, or like, oh, you're not showing up, or you're not putting in enough heart, or like run faster. And so or like watching like teammates like leave because they're just so tired of like being put down or like running to the ground, you know, they burn out, and it's so like heartbreaking because, you know, sports like has done so much for me. And so I don't know, I just know that I know sports can have such a positive impact on people. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons I really want to, you know, be a strength and conditioning coach or look into like coaching other athletes or other people, because, you know, I want to show kids that, you know, like you can have fun with sports and like you can do something big with this. So
that's awesome. I didn't expect you to be that transparent about everything. Who wants to, I'm going to open it up. Who wants to give some insight to Marina and some thoughts? Because my only advice would be like, you just got to keep at it. You just got to keep pushing. You just got to, and having that fear is probably a good thing. If you came in here and said, wow, you know, I'm good, right? You know, then we'd be really worried about you. But I think that fear is very motivating and is going to drive you to be better in that self-evaluation. Ken Vick, let's get you on first. What would you say to Marina if she was on board with you?
Well, you did step one. You're sitting here and you're listening, you're talking. So you're off to a pretty good start. And in all honesty, that's ahead of a lot of people. Now, the hard question is going to be, can you continue it? Here's what we share with coaches. You have to try to continue to get better. And if you are blaming problems on your athlete, if you're blaming it on the environment, if you're blaming it on other stuff, while it might be true at times, what are you doing to overcome it? And are you building the skills? So we talk about going 10 for 10. And by that, I mean, you can come up with a basic program or a basic skill set, Marina, and you can still take care of 3 out of 10 athletes. They're probably going to get better if you do some basics well, and that's not bad. That's a good start. But if you really want to help a lot of athletes, can you get athlete number 4 and 5, where it's not about this basic program, where it's about you really developing your coaching skills? Okay, great. Then to get athlete number 6 or maybe athlete number 7, you got to go beyond your skills. You have to do what people here said. You have to build a network. You have to talk to people that know more than you do. And then to get the next athlete, you have to go outside of your realm and learn something about nutrition or network with somebody in sports psych. And as you keep going to get athlete 9, you know, now it's entirely different. You have to throw out everything you thought you knew, and you have to be willing to start over or look into yourself and go, what am I missing? And then we say, finally, for athlete number 10, you have to remember that this is a person. And maybe the best thing sometimes you can do is forget about everything you're trying to do in sport and just make sure you care about the person. So going 10 for 10 is one of the things we talk about. If you can strive to do that, you'll never get it. We're never perfect. But if you can keep looking for that, you'll be on a good start.
Yeah, great answer. Ryan Banta, what do you have to add?
Well, there's a lot. And I would think that one of the things that you have to remember is that you're going to feel like my kids are about to walk in the house, by the way. So it might get a little loud and crazy, but I just saw them drive past my front window. But as a young coach, you're redlining all the time. You're at a high RPM, and that engine is under a lot of stress because you're taking in so much information. You're trying to process so many things, and you don't have any baseline standards for what you want to do, how you want to do it, and where to even find how to do both of those things. And then you start to piece these things together, and the stress gets a little less, and you become more aware of the things that you didn't know and that you want to go chase in discovery. You start to learn the people that you want to go ask those questions to, and the people you want to research and reach out and find mentors to have. And you're going to put a lot of wear on your tires in those early miles. But one of the things that I found is I used to stress about a lot of stuff that really didn't matter. And the most important thing that I found from really successful coaches is the ability to connect with that athlete. And when I did my master's in positive psychology, almost every one of these studies, when they asked the athlete, who was a good coach? Was your youth coach, your elite coach, your college coach? Didn't matter who they were, at what level, were they good? And then if they said yes, then what were the common responses that they said when they did say that the coach is a good coach? And it was like, I knew the coach cared about me. The coach was happy when they were around me. They were always positive. It seemed like they wanted to get better, you know? So when you look at those things and you think about that, that has nothing to do with, hey, are you good at blocking at the front of the shot? Do you have a good approach on the long jump? What's your foot pattern look like? What does it look like in the power clean? What's your methodology and periodization training? They don't care about that. None of that matters. The biggest thing is, can you communicate in a positive way and know that you show that you care about them? Base level stuff. Then from there, so that your peers think you're good and you can answer the question whether you're good or not, then you have to go through a litany of different things that we could probably talk about, but I don't want to take a bunch of time now because we're on a different path. But that say, okay, these are the aspects or the characteristics of a good coach. Like Ken talked about, are you doing 10? Do you have a 10 for 10 day with your athletes? Also, do you have a 10 for 10 program? You know, what are you covering all these different things? And that can be very intimidating. And as a young coach, it's the basics of how do I become a better communicator? How do I present a positive and confident attitude every day? And how do I reach my athletes every day? Number one. And then as you move forward, you're going to figure things out on who to go to, what to do, how to do it, and you're going to become more confident. And as you become more successful, some of those things you used to worry about, you don't worry about anymore because you've problem solved them and you know where to go to find those answers. When you don't have the solution, you have someone else that you trust that can help you work through it, you know? And that's one of the biggest things I would think as a young coach. Find a network. What I have, like, for physical therapists, I have like my Justice League of doctors that I use for problems that I'm not allowed to solve, like nutrition, you know, musculature stuff, massage therapy, chiro, whatever it may be. I have that, but I also have my colleagues who are my peers to help me work through problems because they have a fresh set of eyes. They usually come at it without any bias. And I can't tell you how many times somebody else has helped me solve those problems. And so the two things that you should do right away when you're worried about this process, and it may seem intimidating, is just be confident, be happy, do everything you can to reach and be professional, but reach those kids every day and show that you care about them. And then find yourself a small network of peers that can help you problem solve and help guide you in a way that you're not redlining and wearing those tires out.
Yeah, that's yeah. I'm sure you could go on, Ryan. Keenan, you talked a lot about objective measurables. What about some of the intangibles that you would pass on to somebody like Marina about being a better coach?
I don't know if I could do anything better than what has been previously said. But I would say, you know, to kind of echo that is just staying persistent, and early on staying persistent at the basic fundamentals. You know, it gets lost in importance off the time, but can you program? And can you program your own program? You know, like oftentimes if you come through the traditional route, your GA or whatever they're called now in the American, like they're not GAs anymore because they don't pay them or whatever, but you're just basically running the head strength conditioning coach's program for the walk-ons or the lesser names. So there's a huge win in that, and that's learning how to coach, right? Because that's the interpersonal or the quote unquote soft skills, is that you didn't get to write the X's and O's, but you got to really own your skills on communicating those X's and O's to that athlete. And so some ways that's a whole heck of a lot better. It also helps you out on, you shouldn't be afraid at an early age to audit that coach's program, and not obviously in an attacking method, but so often it's like, oh, I got a program for 10 teams, and so everybody's going to run this program. There's never any time to like having that coach articulate to you, this is why he or she feels so confident in doing it this way. You know, we lift Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and we do speed, agility, and energy system development on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Is that just because of spacing, or is that because of their keen understanding of biology and physiology? Like what is that? Because it's a huge win, because then it's allowing them to mentor you, and it's showing your development. We've touched on it a little bit, obviously, is that connection with the other people on the performance staff, and that's sports medicine, that's sports psychology, that's dietetics, all those things. You know, it's, again, like you have to be locked up. And when you think about it, you know, odds are is the athletic trainer working the non-revenue sports is just like you. They're fresh out of school. I don't think they allow undergrads to cover teams on their own. They can't. That's against the law now. But right, like, so they're in the same shoes, and they're trying to cut their teeth. And so that's a great way, is like, hey, we're both trying to cut our teeth. We don't want to screw up. How do we do the very best job given the environment that we're given? Like, we're assigned the walk-on defensive backs, or we got, you know, men's and women's tennis and golf. We got the country club sports. Well, how do we work together to be very, very good? Because eventually, like, the two of you will work up and perhaps can hire each other or form a staff again. So that's something that I know, looking back, I probably wish I would have done a lot sooner. And then finally, as you start to get older, is to not get burnt out, is to find those things that you can help. You don't have to be the expert in, but you can help. So again, is it sports medicine? And so, you know, sports medicine and strength in my world, the way I think about it, obviously being an athletic trainer, certified athletic trainer as well, is like they're all one and the same. But we don't think like that. But like, maybe you're really good at the assessment. And so sports medicine does your standardized orthopedic assessment. You do, I don't know, FMS, whatever. Like, how do we merge those two things together and you can help out? Or, you know, like reaching out to the one staff member that has to cover all 22 sports for sports psychology. Like, what are some things that they can help? Can they create an intake form, so that just like you have an intake form for strength and conditioning, an intake form for sports medicine, you're starting to create an intake form for sports psychology, things like that, that I think will just, again, you add it to your toolbox. And so now you don't just have a toolbox, like you got an electrical equipment toolbox too. So an AD, a GM, someone's like, oh, this person's different. They're an electrician and a carpenter or whatever. So that's my own little piece.
Yeah, Bob, when you talk to or address like new staff that are in strength and conditioning, or interns, people who are thinking of getting into the profession, what are some of the key things that you say and talk to them about, like in Marina's case, like to get them thinking about the future? And I a couple of people I've talked to now, they're very, very hesitant to get involved in strength and conditioning because of the economic implications of the pandemic and all that. Maybe there's less jobs. But what are some of the things that you're offering for people who are moving into the profession?
The first thing I tell them is don't stand around. I can't stand that. Don't stand around. I got you here to coach. Go coach. You know what it's like? It's like learning Spanish, right? So I'm a Chicano. I Spanish speak, but what I'm saying is I had to teach myself. My father's full-blooded. My grandparents are full-blooded. They speak. They're from Mexico. My father never spoke a lick of Spanish. So I learned later on that, when my first trip to the Dominican, Billy Bean, that quickly that I couldn't coach half our team. We had a lot of Dominicans on, even on the big league roster, let alone in the Dominican, right? Like I couldn't coach half my team unless I learned Spanish. So I just started putting the tapes in there, and that leads me to item number 2 is just get the job done. If I tell you to go do something, go do it. Don't come back until it's done. Don't ask me how to do it. Otherwise, I would tell you, why would I tell you how to do it? I would do it myself. Go do it. Don't come back. So I think the biggest thing is go coach, go coach. And so the Spanish, the analogy there is, people who are trying to learn Spanish, even in my case, especially when you're around Spanish speaking, nationals, is, well, I don't want to sound dumb. And I want to make sure I say the right thing. If you wait until you can say the right thing, you're out of luck, right? You're completely out of luck. Speak it, be wrong. They'll help you. They'll appreciate you. In fact, you're going to help them speak English, which actually happened in our case. I would speak Spanish to the Latin players. They would speak English back to me, and we would just teach each other, really. It's the same thing with coaching. Go coach. If you're going to go to a place, hope the right place that has good leadership, and a place that has experience, then that's the place you want to screw up. That's exactly where you want to go, because I'm going to help you. You know, I'm going to take pride and place in you. I mean, I really, one of the things that I thought that we did, Craig Sowers and later on Nate Brookerson, who Keenan was talking about, is that we put 20 interns full-time in the workforce in 5 years, full-time. They didn't do that just standing around. In fact, we got rid of some folks that stood around. I don't need that, right? I need you to go. And I'll show you the rest, right? So now I'm a little bit on the other side of this thing, like, oh, they don't care. I know how much you care until how much you know you care about who you know. Like, I don't even know the saying. I think that's overrated to a certain degree. I mean, what they don't need is a Dr. Phil. What they need somebody is to teach me how to do the clean, how to squat, how to run, how to jump. You can't have, you can be a really nice person, but not know the lifts. That does me no good at all. I'd rather you help me do some behavioral stuff, and the lifts. That's why I changed what we did into, we were in a certain situation too, we needed to get going. But I changed the internship to certified only. Frankly, I just said, like, no, let's let everybody else certify you. Then you can come here and then I can get you to coach, because I don't have time to do that. But in the meantime, you need to know what you're doing. You need to know the physiology, the kinetics, the kinematics, all that stuff. I'll help you with the rest, right? I'm not going to teach you how to coach like me. I'm going to sense who you are. And with my experience, I've seen screamers and yellers all the way down to, excellent coaches whose words were minimized to the most exact syllable. And that's all they needed, right? When I was with the A's, Dave Duncan, our pitching coach, arguably one of the best pitching coaches in the era, hardly said anything, but he was fantastic. So, I mean, I think the first thing you do is you go in and coach. Same thing with writing programs. If you wait till you write the perfect program, you're not going to have a career. Put it on paper and put it out there and see what happens. It's really the only way you do it. And even now, as of yesterday, I wrote up a program. We have to go in pods and everything in the room. And so this was our first full team. So our basketball team is now full team practice, shared objects, shared locker room. So we're in a regular situation inside our, I guess you would call it the bubble. I guess it's not really that, but so now instead of having 8 people in the room, now I got 16. Well, I only have 10 platforms. So I got there now early and figured out what I want to do, divided up. I went this year, actually, our team is half freshmen and half returning players. So I split them up. But then I thought with the schedule I had, and we did some Monday and Friday, we do force plate testing, jumps, counter movement, PVC pipe. And the time didn't allow what I had, right? So I just looked at it and managed it as we went, made that change right then. So I thought what I had was going to work. I changed it. Is it going to cost us a championship? Probably not. But I put it up there and we said, let's go. Because it's not life or death if the program doesn't work out, if what you have isn't perfect, right? And I think the other thing is just get the job done. I mean, I think we find today, I said people because like Mike, everybody's younger, right? So I just go, oh, well. But inexperienced, we'll use the term, inexperienced coaches also are coming from a generation of folks, and I see this with athletes, and this is my observation, who not only have been not allowed to fall down on their own, but they weren't allowed to get up after they fall down on their own either. So there's, what do I do? Where do I go? And I'll leave you this final anecdotal situation here that Josh Kristovich, who's an assistant strength coach for the Browns, is a Meg and Mike Stone product, right? Came to me and, whenever Meg said, hey, I got an intern for you, I never interviewed them. They were hired immediately. I know Meg, like we're sisters and brother, and I knew what they were going to come to me with. So he's now, carving his way out. But anyway, we're in a situation where we just finished swimming, right? So we just had 40 kids in the room. Nate did a great job working them out. So they wiped out our morning towel supply, which is not unusual. But I told Josh, okay, well, so it's now 8 o'clock. We got a team coming in at 10. I need towels. Go get some towels. So he comes back and he says to me, well, the equipment room's closed. And I said, okay, go get some towels. And he just looked at me and he took off, right? So then he came back with about 10 or 15 towels. He went through the soccer locker room, and then he went into the training room. He came back with 15. And he said, well, this is all I can find. And I said, oh, good job. Go get some towels. We get the rest of the day here. What do you expect us to do? Share? Only use the dry end? So he left again. Anyway, he had managed to come back with all the towels. And I said, look, so first of all, let's figure this out. This isn't a director or strength and conditioning thing, right? This is a safety measure. If we don't have towels to wipe down the benches, and in that next couple of hours, wrestling was going to be in there. I mean, who carries around more bacteria with them all day long than a wrestler, right? So I can't have them come in without towels, Josh. This was a safety and health measure. So if you had to go home and take your towels and rip them into 30 small pieces, that's what you should do. All right. And then of course I would pay for that. I would reimburse you. But in the end, you need to get that done. Don't come back to me without it being done. And this is what we don't find anymore, which some of us here had grown up with. It's not as much. I need somebody that I can say, go do this. And then I can just drop it off my list, because we got a lot of things to do. Keenan's got a lot of things to do. You do, Ken does. And we don't have time. And that's part of that is the difference between leadership and management, right? Management takes care of that. We set the vision. We're not the ones that are programming and setting stuff. We're saying, this is how we'd like it to get done. Then everybody else goes and does it while I can keep managing the top end of it. So that's nice. That's my advice.
Good messages. Language immersion, trial and error, and get her done. Yeah, that was a good one. Ryan, do you want to finish us off here, since it was your article, and give your final thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, man. First of all, I really appreciate you letting us gather today and have a conversation about it and bat it around, and everybody who came on today, super appreciate it. And I know that a lot of coaches who are asking this question will be able to go back to this video and, when it gets posted on YouTube and help maybe kind of say, okay, maybe I'm not that far off, or maybe I am going through some of the same experiences. So I really appreciate it. And I think one of the things to kind of sum things up when we're trying to ask that question is, performance, progress, placement, point of separation, peer review, limit injuries, retention, peaking, okay, lexicon, standardization, vision, self-awareness. These are all things that you can do in a lot of different ways to kind of answer that question for yourself. And I think that when we look at those standards, those things, those items, it's a nice checklist when we're talking about, kind of when Ken was talking about his 10 for 10, those are things that you can look at and go, okay, what am I doing in that hemisphere for myself as a coach? How am I learning? And one of the things that Bob said, which is really important, is you're going to make mistakes. If you wait for perfection, my students in my classroom, and it drives me nuts. I tell them all the time, don't let perfection be the impediment of progress. Turn it in, make your mistakes, because that's where I teach you. You're going to make, if you don't make mistakes, then what's the point? I'm just talking at you and we're not going to learn, and we're not going to get any better. I tell my kids all the time, when I went down and wrote that freaking monstrous book, that took forever to get done, I told my kids I have a learning disability in writing. Okay. I used to get grounded every time I had to write a paper, and it didn't matter how big or how small, because my parents refused to let me turn in junk, but that was practice. That was one of those things. I was not worried about being perfect. I was just worried about how long is this going to take and all these kind of things. And I had to work through that in my own head to be okay with the fact that, like, this is a process. It's not going to be perfect right away. It's never going to be perfect, but let's get something in. Let's learn. Let's get better at it. Go out there and coach, get these things done, make mistakes. And at the end of the day, most of the time, if you're well-intended and you've had experience in the sport, you know what really will screw an athlete up, and you won't make that risky mistake until you've had time and experience to kind of implement whatever that may be, where you think that might be the necessary thing to move the athlete forward. You're not going to have them jump off a 8-inch box into a depth jump with a 20-pound vest over fire and lions. You're not going to make that kind of mistake, but that idea of getting out there, being willing to make that. And then one of the things that, and it's in the article, I'll leave you with this. Dan Pass said, a perfect system is easy to break. It's easy to break. You never want the perfect system. If you're a good coach, you create a robust system that can absorb mistakes and respond and produce the repeatable results with a point of separation that you're looking to achieve. And at that point, you're on your way to being a good coach.
Thank you for that, Ryan. And I hope everybody gets a chance to look at the article. And thank you for taking the time this afternoon on a Saturday. I know it's a lot of people's free time. I'm going to go out now and I'm going to coach my kids at the track, which is probably the most fearful thing I'll do because now it's your flesh and blood out there and people are like, how come your kids suck? Right. So yeah, I'm really testing myself. So if that helps, have kids. Okay. Have kids and try to, the whole parenting thing is really difficult. So, but thank you everyone and have a good rest of your weekend. Take care and hope to see you soon.